Hi, this is Ben Hovey, and I'd like to guide you through some of the basics of Ableton Live 9. When you first open up the program, you'll see a screen that looks similar to this that is divided into 3 different sections. On the left-hand side is our browser, where we can access any sound from the Ableton library, drum racks, Ableton instruments, Ableton audio effects that will alter the sound in some way, Ableton MIDI effects that will alter the MIDI data in some way, Max for Live devices, any VST or audio unit plugin that you might have installed, any Ableton clip, which could be MIDI or audio, any sample from any of your places or the Ableton library. Samples are strictly audio. They are either WAV, AIFF, MP3, or FLAC. Below that, you have places. These include any Ableton Live pack you might have installed, your user library where you can keep projects, custom presets, custom racks. Then you have your current assets of your project, your current project, and then any custom folders that you designate, which you can add any folders very simply by just selecting Add Folder. The benefit to having it here is Ableton will index that so it can access it, search it, and play back those files instantly. The top right is our main work area. We have 2 different views we can work in, Session and Arrangement. We get to those 2 different views via these 2 top buttons of horizontal lines or vertical lines, or by hitting Tab on the keyboard. Arrangement is our more traditional view that if you're coming from GarageBand or Logic, this view will be much more familiar to you because you have a traditional timeline and anything you record will go on that timeline. But what makes Live stand apart from other DAWs is the session view. And this is great for when you're composing or coming up with ideas on the fly. You can rearrange different parts. You can only have 1 clip playing on that track at once, but you can switch back and forth between them at any time. So you can arrange things on the fly. Right below our clip launch slots is our mixer section right here. We can hide or show individual sections based on these buttons on the bottom right. The top section being our input and output, which sets the input and output for the track. Right now we're using an audio track, which my voice is coming into, set to external in via this chooser menu, coming right into my audio interface, into input 9, which is the microphone input on the front panel. By default, this is going to the master output, which would go to the master channel, but if I wanted, I could send it to another track, either sends only or possibly some other external output. Below that, I have my send section. This sends the signal to a return effect track, which I have here. I can hide or show those via these buttons. By default, I always, in my template set, have a reverb set to my A return and a delay set to my B return. So when I turn up the knob, you'll hear reverb on A and delay on B. You can select whether it's pre or post fader via here. Post fader is standard. When I have post fader selected and I turn down the volume, my voice gets softer and the effect gets softer. But if I have it on pre fader, I'll turn up the knob and turn the volume down, and you just hear the reverb. That can be useful in a lot of ways if you just want to hear the effect. Below that is the actual mixer section. I'll hide everything else, so we're just focused on that. We have our volume control. If you just select it and you hit the delete key, you can center all these or default them, 0 dB on the fader or right in the center for the pan control, left, right, and then hit delete. You'll be right back in the middle. Below that is the track activator switch. This will turn on and off the audio, so I will talk and you can hear it cuts out the audio. Solo switch, so that'll be the only thing that I hear, and then the record activator. Also in the I/O section are the monitor switches. These change the way in which the audio is monitored on this track. By default, this is set to auto. So if the track is record enabled, you'll be able to hear the audio input into this track, in this case my voice coming into the track. As soon as I trigger a clip off on that track, the audio that is coming in will stop. It will automatically switch between the two. Or if I go to another track and record enable that one, and this record enable comes off, my input will stop as well. But sometimes it's more handy to have, if you want to monitor the audio all the time, you just set it to in. And then it doesn't matter whether you have record enabled or not enabled, and all your clips will be grayed out on that clip. You will not be able to trigger any clip. The third option is off. When that's selected, I will no longer be able to hear the audio that's coming into the track, and I'll only be able to trigger back clips that are previously there. I'll just quickly go through what we have at the top of the screen. We have tap tempo. We can click that or assign that to a key and tap out the tempo. We can change the tempo via the tempo slider here. We can nudge left, nudge right, change our time signature here. We can turn on our metronome on and off here and change the metronome level here, as well as the Q level. This is our Q level knob. So that will change the volume of both the metronome and any loop that we preview before we load it in. Next to that, we have our global quantize chooser menu, where by default that's set to bar. So anytime I trigger off a loop, it's going to trigger at the very next bar line. I can set that to quarter note, so every time I trigger, it'll trigger on the next quarter note, and so on and so forth. Then I have the follow button, our timeline where the arrangement is. So this is on the 458th bar beat, subbeat. I have our play button, stop button. I have our record button. This record button is different than this record button, and then this records it to the arrangement view. When you hit this record button, it will record every movement that you make to any knob, any way you launch clips, and it will record any track that you have record enabled in a linear way in the arrangement view. Next to our global record button, we have our MIDI overdub button, followed by our automation arm button, followed by our re-enable automation button, and then our session record switch. That coupled with the automation arm switch, we can record new in Live 9 any of our fader movements or knob movements directly into the clip. Then we have our punch in, punch out buttons for arrangement view and loop switch, followed by our pencil tool, where we can draw in automation or notes into the note grid, followed by our computer keyboard. If this is enabled, your computer keyboard can act as a MIDI keyboard to input notes. After that, you have your key mapper, where you can map anything to a key on your keyboard. That includes faders, knobs, switches, or triggers. After that, you have your MIDI mapper, where you can map anything to a MIDI control. After the MIDI mapper, you have your CPU usage meter, and after that, you have your disk overload. Okay, let's get into it and start loading in some sounds. Right here at the top, I'm going to turn on the metronome, and then when I hit the space bar, it's going to play back that metronome. If that metronome is not loud enough or too loud, you can change its volume via the Q level knob down here in the bottom right. This Q level knob also adjusts the volume of your previewed loop. Here I have, I'm going to turn that down actually, and here in the left I have a folder in my places and samples. It's a subfolder. It's all breaks that I've collected over the years. This one being a Curtis Mayfield break, and you can hear it with the metronome. It's playing back in perfect sync, which is great. No matter what tempo I have in Ableton, that's going to play back at that tempo. So here I'm at 129. All I have to do is drag and drop that loop directly into my project, and it will play back in sync. This works with any of these because they are perfectly cut into exact bars. this Curtis Mayfield loop, for example, if I double click on the Curtis Mayfield loop after I load it in, I get the clip view here at the bottom, and I can see that it's exactly 4 bars. Now, and you can see when I change the tempo again, it will slow down, and also pitch change. The change in pitch is because the warp mode that I have selected for this beat, and my default warp mode, is repitch. It repitches it, and it acts much like a turntable, slowing down or speeding up. So if I speed it up, you notice the pitch gets higher, like a turntable, or slow it down, the pitch gets slower. I can change that behavior via the different warp modes. There's beats mode, which is great for beats, for preserving the pitch of the original loop. So now if I speed it up or slow it down, the pitch stays the same, and it preserves the transients in this case, meaning Ableton has already gone through, and all these little gray markers indicate the transients of the loop, and will slice according to those, much like Recycle used to do back in the day. You can also, if it's more of an electronic, heavily quantized, meaning precise rhythms, not swung, one of these other options may work. Like 16th notes, it'll preserve the 16th notes, or quarter note. It'll stretch according to those. Your other modes include tones. Tones is great for monophonic material. That would be either a bass guitar, a voice, a trumpet, anything that's playing back one note at a time. Texture is great for sound effects, because you can adjust the grain size and the flux of that. Complex or Complex Pro are also great. Complex Pro uses the Elastic time stretching algorithm. It's very high performance, also high CPU, but it works fantastically on finish mixes and full loops for really extreme time stretching without a lot of artifacts to go along with it. Because you'll notice in some of the other modes, or if you use a mode that's not for it, like if I were to use tones mode on this Curtis Mayfield break and I slowed it way down, you could hear that those standard time stretching artifacts. But if the instant I switch to Complex Pro, you'll hear a lot of those smooth out, and even more so when I turn the formants and the envelope down all the way. Or I can keep it to beats, and you can see it preserves the transients. One cool thing, right now it's set to play forward and then backward to fill up that empty space, but you can change this. If I change it to this top option, it'll play to the end and then stop. So each transient plays. That works like almost as a gate in a way. So I can shorten that up. If I just want the transients of the loop, I can just put it on that forward arrow and change that. If it's forward, forward, it just goes forward, forward, and forward, backward. So those are the different time stretching modes. I'll also show a couple other things. Let's preview another loop. Let's turn up the tempo, hit play, and we'll stop this clip. You can stop this clip by just hitting any of the other clips that have the stop button, or the stop clip button here for the track. I can navigate around with my arrow keys, and I can re-trigger the loop just by hitting the enter key or stopping it. Let's preview another loop, and I'll drop that in right below it. And you can see I can switch back and forth between these two. And only one can play back at a time. Since we covered warp modes, I'll just go over some launch modes really quick. By default, the launch mode is set to trigger and to global quantization. So that means it will trigger based on whatever the global quantization value is set here. Right now it's set to bar. So now when I trigger off this loop, it will trigger it. And then if I trigger it again, it'll re-trigger it from the beginning on the next bar. If I set the global quantize to quarter note, and and I just hit enter, it'll trigger every quarter note. If I put on eighth note and I spam the enter button, it'll trigger on the eighth notes, and so on and so forth. So that's re-triggering. Gate mode, it will play for as long as I hold down the switch, which in this case is an enter key. This could be a button on your grid clip launcher or a key on your keyboard. When I hit the button, it plays, and when I let go, it turns off. It just gates for as long as I hold down the button. I can set this to toggle, and in this mode, when I trigger it, it'll play, and I trigger it again, and it'll stop. And then we also have repeat mode, which I'll trigger it, and when I hold down the button, it'll just re-trigger based on whatever value. Right now it's set to global quantization, but this repeat mode is very handy. If I make multiple copies of this, you could do a breakdown pretty simply. So the top one will keep by default. All these are set to repeat. You can change the value of multiple clips at once. Just select them all, and then you can change the mode for all of them. But in this case, we are going to have a different rhythmic value for each of these. They're all set to repeat, but this one, instead of being set to global, we're going to set this one to quarter note. We're going to set this one to eighth note. We're going to set this one to 16th note, and this one to, set this one to 32nd. So now when I trigger these off, you'll see you can do a really cool little build. All right, next I'd like to explore the difference between clip and device views. So when we double click on any of these loops or clips, if you will see our clip view where we can see all the parameters of that clip. But we also have a device view. So say I've got this loop playing and I want to add some effects. I can just go to our audio effects from Ableton, and let's see what we want to put in. Maybe just we can put in filter. All this happens in real time. We'll put an auto filter on there, and we'll give it a little LFO to modulate it, and we'll modulate it by time. We'll change that to a rhythmic value, quarter note, and the sky's the limit with this, so feel free to experiment. You can just keep adding effects. So we'll add a ping pong delay, and then maybe a phaser. And we can switch back and forth between these views now by just double clicking on the clip. Will take us to the clip view, and if we double click on the track header, this is our device view, which shows us all of our devices for that track. After that, we can go on and we can record some MIDI or add some tracks. If we want to add tracks to this project, we can just hit Command T if it's an audio track, or we can hit Command Shift T or Control Shift T if you're on a PC for a MIDI track. So with this audio track, let's say I'm going to put this Curtis Mayfield back here. I'm going to move these up here. I'm going to put this back to full. And I'm going to loop this in a different place. So if I go to Dazzle right here, this Dazzle loop, it has this melodic thing, and I don't necessarily want that. So instead of making it loop 4 bars, I'm going to make it loop 2 bars by grabbing this right here, this handle right here on the top right, and pulling it back. And now this loop is only going to be 2 bars. Perfect. And now we're going to record some MIDI information in real time with a MIDI instrument. So I'll go up to my instruments, and I'll just load up something simple like the bass. I'm just going to load up the basic operator. Switch my monitoring on my microphone back to in so it doesn't cut out like it just did, because when this is record enabled, I don't want my audio to stop. The reason why that happened was because auto is selected, and because record enable got deselected, my audio stopped. So we just change that to in and fix that. So here I've got my basic operator patch, and since it's a bass, I don't want it to be polyphonic, so I'm just going to click on this section right here, and I'm going to change it from 6 voices to 1, so only one voice can play back at a time. And this gives me a nice little sub bass. I'm going to raise the level on the second oscillator just to give it a little more cut through, so it gets a little bit of higher harmonics than just the sub. And now I'll play this back. And whenever I want to record, I can either double click and make a 1-bar MIDI clip and draw my notes in, but I'm going to record it in. So with my MIDI keyboard, because this is record enabled, I can just trigger this. It will trigger on the global quantization value, which is now set to bar, and I can record a basic bass line. And as long as I trigger it again, it will stop right before the next bar, so I can get a concise loop. So you'll see in this case. And if you don't like it, like I don't like that, I just delete it, and let's go a little lower and go. So just like that, I've got a loop. I can record a variation if I go to the second part. Now maybe let's go up to the 4 here. We were in A, so now I'm going to shift to D. Now for the third clip, let's go back. Let's go up to the 5. Now we can do, let me turn off that Curtis Mayfield loop so I'm a little bit easier to hear. Now we can switch back and forth between these different clips. So that's very handy. Now let's add another track. Let's just add some chords to this. I'm going to load up the electric, which is just the Ableton electric piano emulator. And we'll just comp like a basic chord. So again, I select a clip that's record enabled. I'm getting ready to trigger, and it will start recording right on the bar. So 1, 2, anywhere here. Now for the second part, where it's the 4, I'm gonna record a 4 pattern, something in D. Here we go. Now down, I'll trigger off this scene. And what you see I'm doing here is I'm just triggering off the different scenes over from the right-hand side. So it'll follow it down. These can be arranged in any different way that you want. It could be, the intro to your song, the verse, pre-chorus, chorus, bridge, or any arbitrary. Like right here, we're just working. This is just going to be one section. It's just going from the 1 to 4 to the 5. So now we're on the 5, so I'm going to record an E minor chord. I don't like that, so I'm just going to hit delete as it's recording, no problem. I'm going to play a 9 chord here. And I'll copy this Curtis Mayfield loop and we'll bring it back in. And I don't mind that final part on the dazzle loop because it's in the same key. So we'll go back to the original loop and we'll make it the full 4 bars again. So now I can switch back and forth between these by just triggering off these scenes. And I can also label these or any of these tracks by via Command R. So let's name these scenes really fast. I hit Command R by selecting it, and I'll just call it the 1. That's fine. And I'll call this one 4. And I'll call this one 5. And we can just delete everything else if we want, so we don't not confused. So we've got 1, 4, 1, 5. So this is a little rough arrangement. And now what I can do is I've got this, but I don't want to have to trigger this 1, 4, 5, 1, 4, 5. So we're going to put this in the arrange mode. And the simplest way we can do this, I'm going to pull the transport all the way back to 1. So when I hit record, it'll record this right from the get-go. When I hit record, it's just going to automatically record anything that is being played back in whatever order I trigger them off. So I'll just do a standard pattern when I hit record here. Alright, so I got an 8-bar pattern, and if you'll notice, if I hit tab to get to the other view, everything is laid out exactly like it is. I have to hit this button right here, this red button, back to arrangement, and that is going to let me hear whatever's on this, and as it's recorded. It recorded everything as I triggered it. And then we don't want this because it loops. And to get that to loop, I just select this loop brace, grab the left handle here, grab the right handle, and it's selected 8 bars. And if I just hit the loop button, it will loop between those two. So you'll notice when it hits the 8th bar, it'll go back to the beginning. Perfect. So now I'm just going to record a simple melody, turn the loop off. And we'll just load up a lead, this time from our sound library from Ableton. We'll just go to synth lead. We'll just grab one of these. Who knows? Let's try good old vintage fat lead. That sounds good. Grab that. Might have to adjust the volume. Just adjust the volume a little bit. And let's put our send and return. Let's add a little bit of reverb and delay to this. Perfect. All right, here we go. Now we're going to record this lead in a different way. Since we're in this linear mode, we don't want to record this in session view. We want to record this line in arrangement view. So if I just hit record here and I'll stop it, I'll put the transport back to 1, drag this back, and hit record. And just record a simple melody, and it will play, it will record right over the top. And just like that, it works. Now I can take this one step further, you know, because I want to definitely record more than 8 bars. I can just select everything, and I can hit Command D, and it's just going to duplicate this out. Now I can record for a full 2 minutes. And on that note, we'll end for today, and I'll be back soon to show you some more stuff. So I'm going to start recording by hitting this, and I'll see you soon. Thanks.